Plot summary of Big Two-Hearted River by Ernest Hemingway. In Part 1, Nick gets off a train at the station in Seney, Michigan. The train then goes around one of the burned hills and disappears. Nick sits on his sleeping bag and pack and looks around. Nick is used to seeing the 13 saloons, the hotel, and the scattered houses on the hillside, but they are all gone now that Seney has been burned to the ground. Nick walks over to the river, which is still there and looks the same as he remembers. He watches the trout in the river, which don't seem to move even though the water around them is moving quickly. Nick is happy as he walks back to get his pack because he knows that even though Seney is gone, the fire can't burn the whole country. He readjusts the heavy pack on his back and heads down the road by the river that leads into the wilderness. He climbs the hill that separates the railroad tracks from the pine tree-dotted plain. Nick has a hard time going uphill. His pack is heavy and it's a hot day. But he is happy because he feels like he no longer needs to do many things, including think. Nick is taking a break to smoke a cigarette when a black grasshopper crawls up his sock. He has seen some of these bugs as he hiked. He looks at it carefully and sees that it is just an ordinary grasshopper that has turned black from living in a burned and ash-covered area. Even though it's been a year since the fire, the bug is still black, and Nick wonders how long it will stay that way. He tells it to fly away when he talks to it. He keeps walking until he reaches the fire line. Beyond the fire line, the land seems to come back to life, with ferns growing on the ground and islands of pine trees in the plain. Nick is tired and could turn towards the river to set up camp at any time, but he wants to see how far he can go in one day. He sleeps under some pine trees and wakes up when it's almost time for the sun to go down. About a mile away, he starts walking towards the river. When he gets there, trout are jumping out of the water to catch bugs, and it looks like rain to him. Nick sets up his camp between two pine trees with care, and he is happy with the result. He feels safe and has a good feeling of having done well. Then he realizes he's hungry, so he heats up some canned food for dinner. When it's ready, he has a lot of fun with it. He thinks about his old friend Hopkins while making coffee. He and Hopkins used to argue about the best way to make coffee. Hopkins was liked and had a lot of money. He went away when a telegram came for him, and Nick never saw him again. Nick thinks that the end of Hopkins's story is bitter, just like the coffee. He can feel his brain starting to work again, but he knows that he will soon be too tired to think. The night is quiet, and so is the swamp. He goes into his tent and falls asleep. Part 2 starts the next morning when the sun starts to warm up the tent and wakes Nick up. He crawls out and looks at the meadow, the river, and the swamp with its many trees. Nick doesn't want to eat breakfast, but he knows he has to. While the water for his coffee is warming up on the fire, he catches brown grasshoppers to use as bait for fishing. He knows that they won't hop away in the cold morning dew, but that it will be hard to catch them once the sun comes up. He puts them in a jar and seals it with pine bark, making sure to leave a hole so they can breathe. When he goes to the river to wash his hands, he is happy to be near it. After making buckwheat flapjacks for breakfast and eating them, he makes onion sandwiches for lunch and cleans up his camp. Nick then puts together his old fly rod that he's had for many years and heads to the stream with it and his other gear, a jar of grasshoppers around his neck, a landing net on his belt, and an old flour sack on his shoulders. He is happy and feels ready. The water is very cold when he steps into it. The first fish he catches isn't big enough. Nick wets his hand before he puts the trout back in the water because he knows that a fungal infection can kill a trout if a dry hand touches it. Nick goes where the water is deeper because he wants to catch trout that are bigger. This time, he feels a pull on the line and tries to reel it in. When the big trout jumps out of the water, he knows he has caught it. Nick has never seen anything bigger, but this one breaks the line and gets away. Nick is upset and feels like he might throw up. He gets out of the water, lights up a cigarette, and watches the river until he feels better. He goes into the water where it's not too deep and fishes by an upturned elm. This time, he gets a big trout and is able to reel it in. So the fish can stay alive, he puts the fish in the flour sack and lets the bottom of the sack hang in the water. Nick moves downstream because it is getting hotter. He puts a grasshopper on the hook and casts it into a hollow log in the stream. He feels a bite right away. He sees that the trout is shaking its head to try to get the hook out, so he works hard to pull it in. He also stuffs this fish into the bag. Nick eats his lunch while sitting on the hollow log. He watches the narrow part of the river where it goes into the swamp. There are many low-growing trees in the swamp, and it looks impossible to get through. Nick doesn't want to go into the swamp, which is dark and scary. The water would be up to his armpits deep, and he wouldn't be able to catch any trout there. He doesn't want to go down the river any further today. Nick hits the fish he has caught on the log to break their necks. Then he cleans them and throws the insides on the beach where minks can find them. He washes the fish in the river and then walks to his camp on the shore. He turns around and looks back at the river. He thinks there will be plenty of days to fish in the swamp in the future.
About the author. Ernest Hemingway was born to well-educated, wealthy parents in Oak Park, Illinois. His father got him interested in the outdoors when he took him camping and taught him how to hunt and fish when he was young. During World War I, when Hemingway was only 18, he went to Italy to work as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross. There, he was badly hurt. After this, Hemingway moved to Canada and got a job as a reporter for the Toronto Star Weekly. He married Hadley Richardson, and the two of them moved to Paris in 1921. There, Hemingway worked for a newspaper as a foreign correspondent. Hemingway spent time in Paris with famous writers who lived there, like Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and James Joyce. Stein called this group of writers the Lost Generation. Hemingway kept his job as a reporter for a newspaper, but he also started to write fiction seriously. He published a book of short stories called In Our Time, and his first novel, The Sun Also Rises. He moved to Florida in 1928, and the next year, A Farewell to Arms came out. This book made Hemingway a well-known American writer. His third wife, Martha Gellhorn, gave him the idea for the book For Whom the Bell Tolls, which got him a nomination for a Pulitzer Prize. The Old Man and the Sea, which he wrote in 1952, won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. At this time, Hemingway's mental and physical health were slowly getting worse because he was an alcoholic and may have had a genetic disorder. He shot himself and died at his home in Ketchum, Idaho, on July 2, 1961.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.